Well, for this episode, I'm going to be taking a break from working on the bonnet and getting to work on some of the engine compartment stuff. My engine is being worked on as I'm filming this video. A friend of mine is doing that, and it's scheduled to arrive in about the next 3 or 4 weeks. So what I thought I would do is shift over to the engine compartment, which I had painted earlier, and start getting things in there now, because it'll be a little more difficult to get those pieces in when the engine is in there. I'm going to get the brake and clutch master cylinder installed. The lines, these are the old lines here. Get this plate done here and get the brake lines and fuel line run across here. So one of the other things I'll be working on is getting the brake line and the fuel line coming from the back of the car up to the front. So there'll be a little bit of work underneath. As I showed you in an earlier video, I purchased a kit with all the brake lines ready to go, and they just need to be bent to the proper shape. And they're coated. You can see this one's got a C on it. So this one goes from the junction box over to the driver's side wheel, or left-hand side. I've cleaned up the little 4-way junction block for the brakes and the switch. That'll get installed, and then I also have a new clutch line. Again, this will need to get bent to the proper shape, but I have the old ones to use as a pattern. Now for the cover plate and for the master cylinder housing, I have a new gasket. I've also cleaned up the bolts and the washers for that. These are the old clutch and brake line, so I won't be reusing those, but I will be reusing the clips, but I will clean those off before I do reuse those. I've done the same for this setup here. It's painted, new gasket, and the bolts and washers have all been cleaned up. Before I put this in though, I'm going to replace the clevis pins. I'll put a link up above to the video where I put this all back together. So I'll get those put in, then we'll get this bolted all into place. So here's the master cylinder for the brake and the clutch. It's all one reservoir. But I'm going to replace the clevis pin that goes through here because it was a little worn when I put it back together. I've already pulled the one spring off, and there's a little retaining pin there that'll pop off. Pin goes out, and then here's the new ones to go in. Well, looks like I'm going to have to pull that out. Well, looks like I'm going to have to take this a bit further apart than I had hoped, as those pins actually won't go out past the side here. So I'll take this out, I'll take it over to the bench and loosen up a few things so I can get those pins out. So from this angle here, you can see why the clevis pin won't come out, because it's actually a little bit behind this part of the pedal box. So I'm just going to pull this bolt out, and that way it'll free up the pedals themselves, so that I can push it up, slide those pins out, and just when I put things back together, remember to put this spacer back in. So there we have the new clevis pins in place, and I noticed that I've actually installed them incorrectly the first time. They're supposed to go in from inside, not the outside, so that's been fixed as well. Springs are back on, so now this is ready to bolt back in the car. So one thing I've noticed on these new gaskets is they're actually, they've shrunk a little bit, or they're actually made a bit smaller. So what I'm going to do is put the bolts in first, and that way I can stretch the gasket out to the appropriate holes. And these holes are tight enough that they will hold the bolt in place. Alright, so there you can see I've got the gasket in place, and it's holding all the bolts in position, because the holes are a bit small, plus it's stretched a bit. So now I'll be able to flip that over and guide the bolts into the respective holes. So there's the cover plate installed with the new gasket. I've just left this bolt loose and these two as well, because that's where these clips go for the new lines. I'll take the clips off the old lines, clean them up, and then use those to reinstall the new lines in the proper location. So here we have the original line that goes from the junction block over to the left-hand side front brake. Now I labeled this one C to match this one, which matches the little chart here. So this is number C going over to the left-hand side of the car. So I have my trusty tubing bender, and now I'll get started on replicating this shape into the new pipe. There we have the first section of the brake line run. There are a couple of clips that go into this hole here and this hole here, and then brake line comes up to the junction block up here. Now I'm just going to double check to make sure that I've cleared the steering rack brackets, which bolt into these holes here and here, so I don't get any surprises a little bit later on. Next I'm going to do the one that goes from the block up to the firewall, across, and down to the master cylinder. Well, I've now got the brake line run from the junction block. It's down here, up across the top of the firewall, and down to the master cylinder. So next up is the clutch line. Now you may be wondering, why is there this little coil in the clutch line here? Well, this point here is mounted rigidly to the car, and this here, it mounts to the slave cylinder on the transmission. So you imagine the engine is going to be rocking back and forth or moving relative to the body. So what this does, it allows the pipe to flex over a large area rather than having just a right angle that would be bending back and forth. So it just absorbs a lot of the flexing between the engine and the body. Well, I've got the main brake and clutch lines run, and with their little P-clips in the right spot. It took me a bit to find it, but I did have it in one of my baggies labeled P-clips, and clean those up and use those. Here's the clutch line. I forgot to video putting this coil in, but I'll show you what I did with that. So here's the line going across to the left-hand side of the car. I'm just trying to figure out the correct routing for this little bit of pipe here that goes from the four-way junction to the brake hose on the right-hand side of the car. I've seen photos of it going over the damper, which mounts in here, and I've also seen it going under. So I've got a little bit of research to do on that, and to help me make sure I clear everything, I'll just put the damper in place to do that. While I'm waiting to figure that out, I'm going to run the brake line that goes from the back of the car along the underside of the floor and comes up here. We'll clip into this spot right here and come to the bottom connection on the four-way junction box here. This is the brake light switch. So when the line's pressurized, activates a little switch inside here and the brake lights come on. At least that's the theory. So in order to put that little coil in the clutch line, I just used a length of pipe here, clamped it in the vise, and then used that as a template to do the two turns, and that worked really well. The tubing bender I have will only work for up to 90 degrees, so that wasn't going to be a practical choice. I've started to work on the brake line that goes from that four-way junction to the back of the car. This is the end that goes at the back. I had already bent up some of it earlier. Now what I've done, because this is so long and to help things out, is you can see I've just taped the old one to the new one along. I think that'll make it a little easier to follow these bends, especially once I get up to this end here. So here we are under the back of the car. This is where the drive shaft comes through here, and here's the brake line that needs to be hooked up. So what I'm going to do is put a brake hose in here, so I've got something solid to go to with the pipe, and then that pipe comes down the side of this reinforcing rib that goes all the way under the floor towards the front of the car. I thought I would show you, using a piece of one of the floor pans that I didn't use, how the brake line is attached underneath the car. This is actually the underside of the reinforcing bar, and then you'll note that there's a hole on that end and a matching hole on the other end here. I don't know if they're right about. So there's a hole there, and then there's actually holes on the other side as well. And so the brake line runs down one side of this, and the fuel line runs down the other. And then there's these special clips that go around the hose, and I just got another piece here. It goes around the hose like this, and then that part goes through the hole, and it just clamps it in place and holds the brake line in. So there we have the brake line coming from underneath the car along here and up to the four-way block up here. There is a hole down here that is designed for another one of those clips, and put that into place, and that'll just secure the brake hose here. So all in all, I'm quite happy with the work this week, but that's all I have time for this episode. So we'll call that a wrap. And if you enjoyed the video, please share it, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget the little bell icon so you'll get notified when the next video comes out. My name is Ian. This is the Econobox Garage. We'll see you next time.